Much like other races and groups of people who share a similar trait, the deaf community has its own unique set of history and culture. And over the next few minutes, you will learn more about them. I'm William, and today you will become a master of deaf culture. Let's start off with some basic information about the deaf. Some of them can communicate orally, like I am now, but a lot of them tend to speak through sign language, a visual language where hand gestures replace spoken words. I'll be doing an episode of Master of Everything on some basic ASL, so look out for that in the future. That being said, ASL does stand for American Sign Language. So contrary to what some may think, ASL is not a universal language for the deaf. There also exist other sign languages, French Sign Language and even British Sign Language. Each is as distinct from each other as ASL is from English. Like any language, it has its own set of grammar, complexities, and expressiveness. It is its own fully functioning language and can convey subtle, complex, abstract, poetic, and even philosophical ideas. Pretty much anything you can think of conveying through English can be conveyed in sign. The deaf, along with their own set of languages, also have their own history. From 1000 BC, when the deaf had limited rights to property and marriage, to the 20th century, when the first Deaf Athletic Association was established. There's no way I can outline in detail all the important events, so I'm going to focus on a few of the more notable ones. ASL was created to communicate with deaf people. Ever since there have been Americans who have been deaf, there existed some form of American Sign Language. However, standardization did not happen until 1817, before even the publication of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Laurent Clerc and Thomas H. Gallaudet established the first school for the deaf in the US, where they taught ASL the same way to everyone, cementing a standard for how it is used among the deaf community. New words are added with our changing times, and now today, ASL is used by about 500,000 to 2 million people in the US alone. However, starting in the late 1800s, signing had been discouraged by teachers who thought that the only way for a deaf child to fit in a hearing-dominated society was to read lips and speak. In spring 1988, protesters at Gallaudet University in Washington, D.C. grew outraged by not only having their wishes for a deaf president ignored, but by then having a hearing president hired who wasn't even able to communicate through sign. They gained much support from the deaf community, citing that this event perpetuates a myth that deaf people cannot function on their own. Because of the opposition, the new president resigned, a deaf chairperson on the board was hired, and a new president was voted in, Irving King Jordan, who was deafened after a motorcycle accident at 21, and also a Gallaudet graduate. That night, the two new staff members and the student body president met to discuss about the future of the university. The latter apparently came out with tears in his eyes and said there was no interpreter, because for the first time, none was needed. In short, the deaf community in Gallaudet University, the nation's only deaf university, finally held their own fate in their hands. In 1997, the deaf community got even more recognition when the World Foundation for the Deaf and Blind was founded, which helps spread information about deafness and blindness, along with the combination of the two called deaf blindness. As with any group of people, the deaf community has certain preferences that come with being deaf. These may include derogatory statements such as dumb and deaf mute should be avoided, obviously. Some places and people will use the term hearing impaired, but this does not differentiate between deaf people from those with hearing loss, and as such, most deaf people prefer to be called deaf. People, cities, states, and brands. Titles of books and movies will be fingerspelled, or signed with only the letters making up the word. However, fingerspelling is not a substitute for actual signing. Even if a deaf person can't communicate with the sign for the word, they will tend to point, describe, draw, etc. instead of fingerspelling as a first alternative. There are light devices that will go off and let a deaf person know a variety of things. There are devices for baby monitors to let them know when a baby is crying, smoke alarms, etc. There are also vibrating beds to help a deaf person wake up, captions for TV shows and movies, and even special typing devices to help deaf people talk on the phone. The following are some ways deaf and hearing people may communicate without sign language. Pen and paper, for seeking information or conducting business, such as giving directions, orders, etc. This is usually the most common strategy implemented. Gesturing, for limited social interactions or people seen regularly, such as waiters, co-workers, and the like. Lip reading and speech is actually among the least preferred of the deaf person, because only about 30% of English can be understood in this way. Modifying sign language can be used for hearing people with varying degrees of sign ability. A deaf person can adjust their sign language a bit, change the grammar to be a bit more English-oriented, use more finger spelling, slowing their pace, and so on and so forth to better communicate. Deaf people can also use an interpreter, where a third person signs what is said and said what is signed. Another preference of a deaf person, if you are a sign language student, let them know if you can sign. Try to avoid talking without signing, since it's rude to keep the deaf person uninformed. Let the deaf person assign the communication pattern, And if you see others signing, avoid reading their signs in their conversation unless you plan to introduce yourself. Deaf people, spelled with lowercase or little d, usually stay in the hearing culture. Here are some examples from verywell.com. Someone is totally deaf, cannot read lips, and uses sign language. They are married to a hearing person and do not associate with other deaf people. This person will probably be small d, even though they have total hearing loss and must rely on sign language for communication. Another person is totally deaf, can read lips, and communicates orally. They are married to another oral deaf person and socialize primarily with other oral deaf people. Despite their refusal to use sign language, they would likely lean toward big D. That's because the primary association with other deaf people, even though the method of communication is not sign language. A third person is medically hard of hearing and can talk on the telephone, but chooses to use sign language, ASL, as a key means of communication. They are also active in the deaf community's organizations and events and are proud to have hearing loss. This person would likely be Big D because of his attitude toward his hearing loss and his strong identification with the deaf community. Congratulations! If you stayed through that whole video, you now have a good insight on the culture, history, and preferences of the deaf community. Hopefully you found this interesting and consider watching the ASL video on this channel coming in the future. Also on the list of things you should do, subscribe to Reyes Entertainment and become a noble today. Hey guys, I'll try to make this brief. So you may have noticed some changes. First of all, new office. Videos are going to be filmed here from now on unless something major comes up, so let me know how you like it. Also, you may have noticed in the past, I simply said subscribe to my channel, and now I say subscribe to Reyes Entertainment. The series was always going to be a part of Reyes Entertainment, but with some last minute changes to the format that happened after we got the footage, we couldn't change it in time. No worries, just a little last minute mishap, nothing major is changing. And I know Growing Up and Master of Everything wasn't uploaded 2 weeks ago, and that's because I was sick, so I couldn't even research Master of Everything. And with a high fever, I couldn't get out to film early enough to have time for the editor to edit the footage for Growing Up. And Growing Up wasn't out last week because some footage mishaps, and so we put out Spencer's single instead. Which is still pretty good, by the way, so go check it out. Anyway, thanks for listening to me for these last few sentences, and we'll see you guys next time.
Oh, yeah.
I'm just a YouTuber, don't criticize me.